There are three big ways that I describe in this first section. It's reimagining the trigger, reimagining the task, and reimagining the temperament. And reimagining the temperament is really interesting. This is all about how we have these fixed beliefs about the kind of person we are or our nature. And it turns out that so many of these beliefs are self-defeating. One of the myths I talk about in the book is this idea of ego depletion. And this idea of ego depletion says, I mean, that was a psychological term for it, but it turns out that many people kind of believe this. Inherently, we have this understanding that when you spend a lot of willpower, you run out of it. Right? So for me, I would come home from work after a hard day and I'd say, I'm spent, I don't have any more self-control, give me that pint of Ben & Jerry's and I'm gonna sit and watch Netflix for 3 hours, right? Because I'm spent, can you blame me? And that belief, turns out, did have some justification from a few studies that showed that actually for some people, they did run out of willpower like gas in a gas tank. And there were some other studies that showed that there was this magical effect that if you drank a sugary beverage, they gave people lemonade sweetened with sugar, that somehow their willpower was replenished. And so they dove into these studies and they wanted to figure out what was really going on. Turns out the studies don't replicate, that when other psychologists tried to do these studies, that they found that ego depletion is not real, except for the work of Carol Dweck at Stanford, who you know. She did these amazing studies that found that actually ego depletion is occurring, does happen. There's one group of people who do experience ego depletion and that their willpower does run out like gas in a gas tank. Those people were the people who believed in ego depletion. Those are the only people who exhibited this trait. And so we see this in all sorts of aspects, right? This narrative that we're telling ourselves that we have a short attention span, that we have an addictive personality, now some people really do have the pathology of addiction. I don't mean to gloss that over. Some people have conditions like obsessive compulsive disorder or whatever else. Very, very small percentage of the population, but the amount of people who think they are addicted right, or use that as an excuse is much, much greater. And so this narrative that I'm really scared of that we hear these days, that technology is hijacking your brain, that it's addicting everyone. Not only is it scientifically not true, because let's think about it for a minute. Lots of things are potentially addictive and don't addict everyone, right? A lot of us have a glass of wine with dinner. We're not all alcoholics.
Yeah, even drugs.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, millions of women every year are given fentanyl when they have a baby via C-section. Fentanyl, the most addictive substance we know of. Tiny percentage of those women ever get addicted to the substance. And so why do we treat technology as somehow this special class of products? It's silly. Some people do become addicted to technology because any analgesic, anything that solves pain, is potentially addictive. What's really harmful is when we start telling ourselves this narrative, that this technology is hijacking our brains, that what am I gonna do? My kids are crazy because these video games are doing it to them. What does this lead to? It leads to learned helplessness. This condition where we think, well, there's nothing we can do, why even try? And now it becomes true that these technologies are actually persuading us in ways we don't want because of our beliefs about them.
So check the story that you're telling yourself and just try telling yourself a different story.
It's a big part of it, yeah.
Right, and we see this happen a lot of times with people across all ways. I'm not good at math, I'm not good at this, I'm this, I'm this, I'm this, and then it's self-fulfilling.
Right.
You said there's also reimagining the trigger, and there was another piece.
Yeah, the task.
Okay.
So this technique is about how do we see the work itself differently. So if we understand that all behavior is spurred by a desire to escape discomfort, well, what do we do when the task itself is uncomfortable, when we don't like doing that work? And I searched and searched, and I didn't find any techniques that I really liked that really worked. Some people like to use flow, the work of Csikszentmihalyi, and it's I'm sure you know flow very well, but the problem with flow states is that they're really good for things people already enjoy. Right, an athlete that gets in the zone, surfing, right? That's fun stuff. How do you get into flow during your taxes? How do you get into flow cutting your grass? You can't. It doesn't work that way. Right. Even Csikszentmihalyi says he doesn't give any real advice on how to do that.
And so those would be good examples of tasks that you might not want to do. Cut the grass or do your taxes. Yeah. For some people, working out, for some people.
Right.
Okay.
So what do you do? This to me is magic. So I worked with Dr. Ian Bogost, who is at Georgia Tech, and he has this theory that he calls play anything. And he believes that you can learn how to play a task, but play doesn't have to be enjoyable. That the job of play is to divert our attention, not distract. Distraction is about doing things you didn't plan to do. Diversion is a refocusing of attention. And so we can use play under certain conditions to help divert our attention during a task that we otherwise would not enjoy. So he gives the example of cutting his grass. He hated cutting his grass. And so he wanted to figure out, how can I learn to play cutting my grass? And he gives us 2 ways to do this. He says the first step is to add constraints, right? So how quickly can I cut the grass? How can I cut the grass with the least number of turns? Add constraints to the condition, like a sandbox, right? Kids like playing in a sandbox, not because the sand is everywhere, but because it's only in the confines of this little box. Right. That's what makes that experience fun. The second thing that we can do to learn how to play anything is to look for the variability. So he advises us against what a lot of people preach, which is using an extrinsic reward, right? Add a spoonful of sugar. That's what Mary Poppins tells people. Bogus doesn't like that. He thinks that's really bad advice. Because what we do when we add a spoonful of sugar, and we do this a lot, we said, if I work out, I will give myself a smoothie, right? Not only are smoothies horrible for you, but that's a whole other point. The real point here is that if we only use extrinsic rewards, we never learn to enjoy the task itself. Because it's only about the prize, the ribbon, the treat that comes after the reward. And actually, studies find that when people are given these extrinsic motivators, these extrinsic rewards, they're less creative, they're less likely to stick with the task over the long term. So he says, instead of looking for the fun, the play outside, look for it within the experience by focusing more intently, not trying to take your mind off the task, but more focusing on the task itself by looking at the variability. How do you do that? So when Bogus wanted to learn how to play this activity of cutting his grass, he learned everything he could about grass. As crazy as that sounds. The different sod he could use, how he could cut it differently, the fertilizer. He focused more intensely on it so he could find the nuances, the beauty of that task, and that's how he learned to play it. And you say, well, that's crazy. How do you do that? Think about all the stuff that people seem to love that to you would be work. So making coffee, to me, is work. But I have a friend who is crazy obsessed with making that perfect cappuccino. Working on a car. Are you kidding me? To fix a car? You'd have to pay me to do that. I wouldn't do that for free. And yet I have another friend who's a car buff who, in his spare time, loves looking at the variability and the constraints of fixing up his hot rod. My friend who loves crochet. She loves it because the same exact principles. But to me, I mean, that would be work to crochet. So it turns out it's not so crazy that we can actually, by adding the constraints and by looking for the variability, we can learn to play anything.